All right. So, and I'm going to botch these names up, and I apologize for not practicing them. Greg Malagia, am I close?
Right.
Quite close. Okay. Principal Advisor, National Executive Council, Secretariat, Department of the Prime Minister in Papua New Guinea. Then we have Ms. Siboni Biwa, there you go. Business Analyst, Project Administrator in Namibia on the Information Technology Services. Then we have Natalie O'Brady, there we go. The General Manager of the Rape Crisis Society in Trinidad and Tobago. Ms. Kanwal Ali, Deputy Collector of Customs Service in Pakistan, and Mr. Anurag Saye, am I doing pretty well? Okay, Chief Vigilance Officer, Aeronautics Company in India. So the drill is that the way we're going to do this is I'm going to spend about 30 minutes. I have some questions for the panelists, and they're going to respond to the questions, tell you a little bit talk about civic engagement in their particular countries. And then following that exchange, we want to invite questions from you in the audience. So be prepared, think about your questions. You can write your questions down on the question card that's in your program, if you prefer that, or you can ask the questions yourself. We have a wireless microphone, or we're running around the room and asking you to use the microphone if you do speak. That's because it's a large room and we are recording this program. So, without any further ado, my first question, and they're going to answer these questions in the order, I mean, they decide what the order is, and they can talk amongst themselves. I mean, the whole idea is to have a conversation. This is not a media interview in which my objective is to just ask them tricky questions. So, pretty broad question, but talk a little bit about the meaning of civic engagement in the country that you're from, and maybe a little bit about the forms that it takes of civic engagement. We think of voters voting here, but there are other forms. So,
well, good morning to all of you. Larry, thank you for having us here. I bring greetings from India. Civic engagement in India. We have a long history. In fact, some of you may know that India gained independence from colonialism in 1947, and our freedom struggle was a freedom struggle with difference. It was a freedom struggle which was informed with civic engagement and citizen participation. It was not a freedom struggle where there was violence, there was revolution, but with continuous pressure of informed citizenry under the leadership of Gandhi, who advocated peaceful non-violence, or in Hindi what is called satyagraha, quest for truth. It was that citizen participation and an active citizenry which brought India to freedom. Over the years in India, citizen participation has, assumed different forms. Of course, the most important is the citizens' right to vote in an electoral process and decide what kind of government they want, whether they want a change in government, change in policies, change in institutions of governance. This is decided by an active citizenry. And India being a democracy, it helps. Just as you are the world's oldest democracy, India is the largest democracy, 1.3 billion people. And today we have more than 50% of our citizens who are under the age of 30. So we have a very young citizenry in India. And naturally, youth is restless, youth is impatient. So they want governance, they want education, they want reforms, they want development, they want jobs. All that requires that citizens put pressure on the government through organized voices to bring about change. And I can tell you that the problems in a developing country like India is immense because of the sheer size of population, the enormity of problems, the diversity. So unless the informed citizens put pressure on the government of the day, things are not going to move in the right direction. Therefore, in India, we have a policy of supporting voluntary groups, of supporting informed groups, going after a particular cause and putting pressure on the government. And I can just give you two quick instances before I hand it over to my colleagues. Number one is that women's position in India and violence against women in India reached a very, very dangerous proportion. The women were not safe in big cities, and there were instances of molestation and rape, and it enraged the community, it enraged the society. And the youth of India, they organized themselves in a peaceful way, and through the use of social media and informed independent press and public opinion, it really put pressure on the government to bring about change in the laws. And we have now today a much stronger law against rape and molestation and crime against women. So that happened because there was an active citizenry. That happened because people were able to put pressure on the government of the day to bring about the reforms which they wanted. The second quick instance which I would like to share with you is an anti-corruption authority in India. In the last 10 years, with growth and development in India, there was also a spurt in large corruption cases. So we had ministers and senior bureaucrats and businessmen all involved in grand corruption in allotment of resources, in allotment of licenses for mobile communications, etc. And it again enraged the sense of the community. And we saw that in India we did not have something like an anti-corruption ombudsman, like you have International Commission, ICAC in Hong Kong, an anti-corruption authority which would investigate and prosecute corrupt bureaucrats and politicians. So this coming together of youth under an umbrella of India Against Corruption, which was a voluntary association, they again came together and there was a large-scale agitation. People came out in streets, youth, left their colleges and came and sat on the streets and put pressure on the government. And it was unprecedented because the government of the day invited representatives from this India Against Corruption to sit with them and discuss with them what kind of laws they wanted to bring into the country. As a result of that, we today have an anti-corruption ombudsman in India called Lokpal. So these are the ways in which in democracy the enlightened and educated citizens and the youth, through use of social media, technology, and through getting together can, put the perimeters of operation for the government and see that they are onto the path of good governance. So these are my opening remarks. I'll hand over to Natalie to continue. Thank you.
Pleasant good morning all. Trinidad and Tobago is what we call a democratic republic or a parliamentary republic. That's important to note because it's our very system of governance that encourages civic participation. We have what we call a parliament, a parliamentary system, which is made up of the House of Representatives and the Senate, as well as we have what we call the local government, which is made up of 14 municipalities. So that's local and central government. And that is the primary mode of engagement, where we have parliamentary elections every 5 years, local government every 2 to 3 years. And generally, that's when you hear the country mobilized and people getting together and exercising their right and having a say. But it's more than national elections. It is about that continuous engagement of the public, continuous engagement of the citizenry. And this is often done through our faith-based organizations, our community-based organizations, our non-profit organizations. And this is how we ensure that we keep the government in check. Especially the non-profit sector, we have been responsible for the passage and implementation of new legislation. For example, the Sexual Offences Act and the Domestic Violence Act, which sought to address the issue of domestic and sexual violence within our country, was generated and led by the citizenry, where we came together and we saw an issue and we made sure that the government was aware. And of course, we can do lobbying through the nice, decent conversations with our parliamentary representatives, or we tend to get a little more excited. We have been very fortunate not to have violence during our election time, but we are people that love to protest. We march, we placard, we get on the media, and we speak out, because that's our right. The importance of the civil society within our nation was recently recognized by our government, and they started last year to establish what we call a civil society board. What they recognized was that oftentimes they are not quite aware of all of the details of a particular issue, and oftentimes the general public is the one that has the actual answers and recommendations, because sometimes our parliamentarians are not as bright as they should be. Sometimes when you sit up there, you tend to see an issue from a particular perspective, and you tend to miss a lot of what is happening on the ground or in the grassroots. So you need to mobilize your grassroots organizations. And what was happening is that even the advisors for several years oftentimes missed the point. So even when you call stakeholder meetings, and I know you know what I'm talking about, you try to go into communities to get answers. The people that attend those meetings are sometimes not the people who have the experience in the issue. So what they recognize is that, hey, what? Let us pull together the civil society organizations. Let us establish a board and allow for the board to mobilize and engage their people and help to advise us more effectively on the various issues that are going on within the country, so that we can establish more effective policies. I must give them credit for making that particular move, but as a member of the civil society organization, I am very skeptical of a board that is being designed and implemented by the government, because we all know that governments can sometimes stymie the voice of civil society. So that is where we are at this point. I think that we are a pretty young, independent republic nation. We are only 51 years of age, pretty young democracy. But we have been quite successful in terms of allowing for the voice of the people over these years.
Papua New Guinea is only about 40 years old, so we're much younger than Trinidad and Tobago. Papua New Guinea started basically courtesy of one of America's former presidents. I think after the First World War, Wilson came out, former President Wilson came out with his 14 points. And one of his points was that former colonies or former peoples throughout developing parts of the world needed to have their own determination. They needed to determine their own future. So I think that gave birth to a lot of countries throughout the developing world getting their independence. Those countries that were not ready for independence, Papua New Guinea being one of them, they were placed under what was the League of Nations. The League of Nations is now morphed into what we know as the United Nations. Basically what I'm saying is Papua New Guinea was at that time what we would describe very almost a Stone Age country. The highest technology we had was canoes and stone axes. So when it came to forming our own government, the world decided we were not ready until the United Nations prepared us for that. And under the League of Nations formally, and later on the United Nations, we were administered by Australia, and Australia was rushed to make Papua New Guinea independent, and basically in 1975 they put their hands up and said, okay, Papua New Guinea is ready now. We were given a form of democracy called the Westminster system. That's shaped after the British system, so you have a parliament. We don't have two parliaments or the bicameral system like the one in the UK and Australia where you have two houses. Most of our people still live in villages, so they are subsistence farmers. They rely a lot on the government to build infrastructure like roads and schools and stuff. In terms of civic engagement, specifically, before you can engage in decision making in government, in public life, you have to know what you want or how to participate in the rules of participation. And most of the rules are still being explained to people. The traditional ways of life still have a large sway over people. But when it comes to major disasters or big things that need immediate help from government, people will turn out to help. Currently, we've moved away from provincial governments. At independence, we had decentralized forms of government where we had provincial governments. We still have provincial governments, but the forms of representation have changed. We still rely on development partners like the United Nations, the European Union, to go out throughout the provinces to help people to learn about their rights and how they can engage in the various forms of government.
Good morning. So perhaps just to give a little bit of backdrop on Namibia, and some of the stories that you've heard from my colleagues are also true for Namibia. I think amongst the panel, I come from the youngest democracy. Namibia is only 24 years old, 25 in March. Used to be a German colony, and the same story applies where we were put under United Nations administration and under the South African regime as well. And we gained our independence in 1990. Civic engagement in Namibia is said to be congruent with national reconciliation to basically drive the dialogue amongst citizens in Namibia. It is, for us, an integral part to the democracy process, because the notion of the power rests with the people, and it is from this power of the people that government derives its authority. It is said to be a stimulant of economic development, and all of those notions are true. Within Namibia, we, I guess, group individuals together. So you would have the odd and occasional individuals speak out or be passionate about a specific policy or legislature. For the most part, we, as in Trinidad and Tobago, look to the civil society and civil organizations where individuals can affiliate or associate themselves because of a deep core belief that they might have, and group together with others. The civil organizations basically provide that platform for individuals to have their voices be heard. In the same vein, or maybe I can just pull on my personal experience, what I found specifically around youth development So in Namibia, we have a non-governmental organization called the National Youth Council. And the National Youth Council basically provides a platform for faith-based organizations, for community-based organizations, and the youth leagues of our political parties to come together and talk about youth development issues. And there's this immense drive for education for youth in order to build a good economy at the end of the day. And this has in turn brought about the establishment of the National Youth Service, which is an organization that basically provides vocational training platforms for youth over and above the vocational training centers which the government runs as well. Here we come to speak out and have sort of a catalyst between youth and the government to lobby for certain youth development issues. And it has proven to be very successful. The National Youth Council has also provided youth with behavior change communication training, HIV/AIDS and skills workshops, which have yielded over 4,000 volunteers in the last 2 years alone. So there are these civic organizations that we engage with that provide a platform for individuals.
Well, good morning, everybody. I will give you some perspectives about Pakistan. As my friend Anurag mentioned, that India is basically the largest democracy and US is the oldest democracy. And I would tell you about Pakistan that Pakistan is the largest pseudo-democracy, which means that in Pakistan, the level of civic engagement that should be there is probably not prevalent. The reason being that civic engagement in Pakistan comes with a great cost. You might have heard about Malala Yousafzai, who was fighting for the rights of girls' education, and what happened, like the tragic episode. She started off by just writing a simple blog supporting women's rights and girls' education and the right for each girl to go to school, and she ended up being hit by a bullet. So it's a huge price that people in Pakistan pay for engaging in any kind of, civic engagement. But still, I think, and I personally feel very strongly that people back home are still very resilient. We still have movements, we still support the good causes and curb all the evil. One specific example that I can quote from Pakistan, which is a very recent example, is one of the movements that has started after the December 16th school massacre, in which more than 140 students and teachers were killed. So there is a new movement which is known as Reclaim Your Mosques, in which the civic society, led by a lawyer turned activist, has decided that whenever any person would say or try to spread any kind of hate speech in the mosques, they would condemn it. And it started off in the capital city of Islamabad, where one Maulana, who is the religious leader of one mosque, has this mosque which is known as the Red Mosque or Lal Masjid, in which he dedicated a library and made it, like the name of that library that he established was named after Osama bin Laden. And after this school massacre attack, he came on media and he just said that I do not condemn Taliban for this attack because it is just a repercussion of what Pakistan army is doing against the terrorists. So this whole media clip enraged the civil activists, the people, and they said that now it's time for us to stand up on our own and, reclaim our mosques. So this is one example that which is just a very recent example. So in Pakistan, I can say that civic participation or civic engagement has not been really encouraged by the governments. The reason being, governments have other priorities, and it's more like a tug of war between power threshold between the politicians and the army. But people, and as a nation, we are very resilient, and I see this time as a time of transition in Pakistan, because we definitely see a silver lining right now, and we are moving towards it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Just sitting here and looking at the panel, I know my colleague here from Trinidad, she's sitting next to, I would say, a colleague here, because we, from that area, sure you're aware of the fact that there are few countries outside of India where you have the diaspora, and Guyana is one of them, and Trinidad. I'm thinking about domestic violence. Is there anything that is going on in Trinidad to sort of curb the drinking, the alcohol? Or, I don't know if it goes on in India, but I know in the Caribbean, I see that as a major problem that sort of intersect with domestic violence.
Thank you for that question. We are often very cautious in looking at causality when we are talking about domestic violence. While we recognize that the use of alcohol or the use of any substance may contribute to domestic violence within a family, we do not attribute causality because there are so many other factors embedded in that issue. However, because Trinidad and Tobago, and by extension the Caribbean, we know how to line. We know how to party. And oftentimes there's quite a bit of drinking around that, and Trinidad is known for its beer. Carib and Stag, what is called a man's beer, which seems to purport the ideology of masculinity surrounding alcohol, which is not very good. But it's also one of our products that is exported and therefore brings income. And it just brings that whole issue of we are not effectively addressing the issue of domestic violence and family violence. We are not truly being honest about it within our country, where there are pockets, civil society continuously advocating for more to be done. The government will give a little and do some things, but in terms of that really comprehensive approach, which may include more education around the impact of alcohol and alcohol abuse on the issue, we are still waiting for. And maybe in the future, that is definitely a line of discussion that we would want to continue to have, not only with government, but also private sector, because Carib Brewery is... Right. Okay.
Thank you. Anurag from India, if I pronounce your name right. You said using India put a pressure on the government for change. How do you see that in the eyes of Gandhi's nonviolent movement? And how do you see that movement in Gandhi's, in the eyes of Gandhi's nonviolent movement? And how effective is that? And what do use in other parts of the world would take from that? Thank you.
Thank you for your question, a very good question, if I may say so. You see, in democracy, an informed citizenry and a citizenry which is educated, I mean, it goes together. If you are able to put pressure on the system, on the government for change, now how can you put pressure? Pressure can be put through violent means or non-violent means. In India, as I told you in my opening remark, the whole history of freedom movement was a history where it was a non-violent movement against the Britishers. And together under a leadership which was full of values and character, because Gandhi's leadership was one of character. And he said famously once, "Be the change you want to see in this world." So the leadership of value and character, which led a struggle for independence and got the country independence, set the agenda for the country in the years to come. And that is something which has become kind of DNA in the country, that if you want to have change and if you are not happy with the present state of affairs, then you need to protest. You need to articulate your opinion peacefully. You need to get together. You need to inform. You need to educate. And you need to use whatever channels you have in the system of governance. For instance, if you have a free and independent media in a country, that's great. Like for instance, in India, we have a system what is called public interest litigation, which means that if there is a public cause and if any citizen of the country is aggrieved and he thinks that there is a problem in the system or something is not working well, under that public interest litigation, he can go right to the Supreme Court and file the public interest litigation, and the judiciary will then take care of that. So there are systems of governance in democracy which function and which enable citizens to use their rights, to articulate their rights, and to force the government to deliver the goods. I think that is the message which comes across from the Indian experience. By no means I am saying that Indian experience is perfect. Far from it, because we have too many problems. Despite last 2 decades of development and liberalization in India, we still have, largest number of malnourished children. We have problems with regard to health care, with regard to drinking water and basic necessities to a large number of millions of people. So there's a lot of work to do, but there is hope and there is faith, because there's a political system which is delivering more than it is non-delivering, if you know what I mean. There are peaceful transition of political parties, changes in government which are peaceful. The elections is without any rigging, and it is free and honest and fair and well managed. So these are the things which we can take from the Indian experience, that a large and a very chaotic democracy, but somehow it is a functioning democracy. Yeah.
I was wondering what the level of unemployment is in your various countries, and if there's any, what's being done about that, because anytime there are high levels of unemployment, they seem to be concentrated in those with the least power. So that's an ethnic or racial, religious, those kind of problems. So, but it still comes down to jobs, and without adequate numbers of jobs, you're always going to have problems. So what is the outlooks in your countries on the job issue?
Well, in Namibia, unemployment is one of the biggest issues that we as a society deal with. About 30% of our nation is also youth, and this naturally yields a problem. In response to the call for unemployment, and even I guess youth that have been part of the liberation struggle and have grown up as refugees in other countries and since have returned to Namibia, have called on government to provide them with jobs. And in response to this, facilitated by the National Youth Council, there was a petition to the Ministry of Youth, Sport and Culture, and the response was to come up with the National Youth Service, because how will you just provide jobs to unskilled persons, youth or otherwise. And the National Youth Service's response was to come up with vocational training programs to empower youth. And then another thing that they did was to come up with the youth credit scheme, which would allow young people to become entrepreneurs in their own right, come up with business plans and proposals which could be properly vetted and approved, as well as providing specific guidance. If you see that this is an excellent idea, it just needs some or other guidance in terms of a repayment plan or what you might have to help youth in that regard as well.
Yes, I would like to share a very interesting conversation and a question that I got at the campus at the University of Washington. One of my class fellows, he asked me, why don't you share something about gay rights in Pakistan? And I told him that in Pakistan, half of the population is living below the poverty line, which means that they are earning less than $2 per day, which is why we have not reached up to the level of thinking about other rights, because we have so many other rights to fight for. First, we have to fight for the right of livelihood. First, we have to, there's so many priorities. So there are no movements supporting gay rights as such, because we have not reached that level. What the government is doing to curb unemployment and encourage employment is that in Punjab, which is the most thickly populated province of Pakistan, government has started some initiatives in which they are providing it's called the yellow cab scheme, in which youth who are unemployed can get access to the taxis or cabs, and they could pay off the cab that they acquire. Then we have, as my friend from Namibia, she mentioned that we have the microcredit scheme for youth. They could apply for that. But our major focus is also on controlling the population, because unemployment and all other issues are linked to population. And Pakistan, being the 6th most populous country in the world, has this very serious agenda of controlling the population. And to do that, we have lady health workers who go from one rural area to the other on the very grassroots level to convince and make people aware of the threats of this growth in population. So
I can share about India very quickly. Lack of employment or unemployment is a problem which is a secular problem. It plagues both developed and developing. It's a problem here, it's a problem in India. Though we heard in State of Union that US is doing much better now, and unemployment levels are, least in a decade or so. To come to India, we have believed since last 2 decades on the trickle-down effect, if you know what I mean. If you have growth on the top, and if you focus on infrastructure and core sectors of the economy, then the trickle-down effect will get down and people will get employed and there will be growth all around. It has helped a bit, but it has not helped to the extent that it would take away unemployment. There is large-scale unemployment, and the agriculture sector, where a large number of people are engaged, is still not regulated. It's very fragmented. The new government's focus is in order to contain this problem of unemployment. Number one is a scheme called Make in India. The new Prime Minister is inviting, investors and entrepreneurs from world over, saying that they will be liberalizing the economy further. They will be, reducing the controls, internal controls, the various regulations which are there, so that it is easier to do business in India, so that they can set up manufactories and spur employment in India. And the second thing is to focus on education. There's a large number of philanthropists who are investing their time, money and energy in India on education. The government is focusing very, very seriously on technical education, and the new sectors of information technology, software, and business process outsourcing have provided youth in India large-scale employment in the last 2 decades.
I am always wary of statistics, and I think in Trinidad and Tobago, we have been wrestling with the issue of how do you define the unemployed, for several reasons. One, Trinidad and Tobago has education, free education up to tertiary level. Over the years, we have implemented several skills training programs, focusing on the areas of construction, hospitality, and even now technology. We have also, within recent times, been promoting entrepreneurship, where there are short-term training as well as short-term small grants, encouraging persons to start their own businesses. We have, over the years, developed programs, what we call like CPEP, which is short-term employment for low skills level persons. So there are a lot of opportunities for employment. We also have a high level of university level graduates coming out of school and having difficulty finding a job within their field, or just difficulty finding a job generally. And usually, once you've graduated with a degree of some sort, you don't want to go into a skills training program, or you don't want to go into CPEP, which is a community-based empowerment program. So I'm sitting here and trying to think of what was the last statistic, and I can't give it to you. I do apologize. But it's just that in an attempt to address that issue, we have implemented several programs over the years, but yet still there continues to be this discussion, and there will always be this discussion of employment, levels of unemployment. I think a greater discussion is the level of poverty, and last statistic says we have approximately 16% of our population living below the poverty line. That is a pretty high and concerning statistic, despite the many opportunities that exist within my country. So I hope that helped.
Are there any other questions out here that somebody wants to ask?
How important do you feel it is to incorporate and possibly break centuries-old traditional ways to include women in the decision-making process by giving them a voice and working towards equal and fair treatment?
Repeat that question.
How important do you feel it is to incorporate women into the decision-making process of these civil decisions and possibly breaking centuries-old traditions? I feel that we need more women leaders, but I'm just wondering, how important do you feel it is in your country?
And they look at me. You were touching a very sore point, and I think a lot of women in here would also think of it as such, because there has been a lot of movement and even ratification of treaties working with the United Nations to ensure that there are more women in leadership positions in many of the countries across the Caribbean and even generally across the world. I believe that definitely if we have more female leaders, we will find more solutions, because women tend to find ways to effectively use limited resources to do great things. Coming from a position of oppression, if I may be so bold to say that, if we look at women and the history of women, you would find that if we go back, and I would probably allow my sister from Africa to talk about the role of women within her society, and a recent discussion we had with our Senegalese sister, where the role of women in terms of not just wife, mother, but provider within their community while men continue to be the primary decision makers, some of the men were not working and no longer able to work, but the woman is taking care of the household, able to make $1 out of 50 cents. And that has been the history of women and the women's movement over the years. I definitely agree that we can make a lot more difference. However, there's a lot more to be done in terms of allowing for more women to hold leadership positions. Because you would, I don't want to start, but you would hear the concept of the proverbial glass ceiling. We recognize there's approximately, in terms of my country, in terms of government, 33%, which is a big difference today. We have our first female prime minister ever for the past 4 years. This year is an election year. First female prime minister. 33% of our parliamentarians are women. However, are they in a position where they truly are empowered, or is it tokenism that is happening? That's a bigger discussion, but we continue to fight.
I can share with you. I mean, there's no way one can disagree with what you have said. but recently, Prime Minister of India launched a program, which is in Hindi. I'll tell you. I'll explain it to you. It's called Beti Bachao, Beti Padhao. It means save the girl child, educate the girl child. Because these are the two major problems we have in India. There's a lot of female feticide in rural areas, specifically in some states in the country which are not so developed. I mean, girl child is a big no-no. So that is a major problem which is skewing the sex ratio in the country. And the second problem, of course, is educating the girl child. Because many times the boy is educated and the girl is not in the same family in the rural areas. So these are the major challenges which we have. But there is a silver lining when we see urban India, because urban India, where women are educated and where they are, together shoulder to shoulder with men in sectors like IT sector, or they are business leaders, they are community leaders. So there's a lot of difference. You somehow feel that there's two different countries you are seeing when you see the kind of difference you have between the rural India and the urban India. But the problem is at the political level. At the political level, we do not have enough representation of women in the political process, in the decision-making process. They have been struggling. There has been a bill in the parliament which would reserve at least 33% of the seats in the parliament for women, but somehow that bill has not seen the passage of the day since last 10 years. So which speaks, what the situation is, and a lot remains to be done insofar as empowering the women in India is concerned.
There's a movie that came out in 1993. The title of the movie is The Hand That Rocks the Cradle Rules the World. And I think women are actually very powerful because of that simple statement. Most men become what they are because of their moms. That's basically it. Mm-hmm. However, in political participation for women in Papua New Guinea, it's something else. We have provinces where we would call social scientists describe as matrilineal societies. These are societies where land is passed on through generations by the lineage of the women. Those provinces are more fortunate because women, because of their rights in land ownership, they're more articulate. They take they have a lot of say in decision making. There are some provinces where the society is patrilineal, where land is passed from father to son, and these are the societies with problems where women hardly participate in decision making. There's a lot of push externally from donors and from development partners to change that situation. There's been talk recently she would call it, Natalie would call it tokenism maybe, but there's a move to include one chair in Parliament reserved for women. That hasn't come to fruition yet, but there's a lot of support for that. So hopefully that comes true in the next few years. Since 1975, we've probably had like 5 or 6, not more than that, women in parliament, compared to maybe 300 or 400 men. So that's our statistics. Thank you.
Well, realizing the importance of this debate about women empowerment and women's role in decision making, Pakistani government has promulgated an act in 2010 which protects women against harassment at workplace. So that was a very good initiative, and that act has been promulgated nationwide. So that is one initiative. The second initiative that was specifically taken also in 2010 was that 10% of quota has been reserved exclusively for women in all civil service seats. So prior to that, there was no specific quota allocated for women, but now there is. Another initiative that is taken by the United States Education Foundation that works in Pakistan is that for all scholarships, they always prefer women and minorities. And that is one reason why you see me here. So, and in the Humphrey group, I would like to share that the number of ladies actually outnumber the men. So we are here to just, and you can see it here as well. So
more power to all of you.
Yes, and I can conclude this by saying that it is the neck that moves the head. So it's that important.
Well, I guess from the Namibian perspective, there's always this notion of gender equality, and our men get so upset when women or when society starts to speak about gender equality, saying that, you know, you fight for gender equality, but when it comes to moving chairs around you and tables around, you always look to the men. And I think that is kind of a misconception of what gender equality means. There was this notion that the country entertained a while ago, and I'm afraid I left the borders, I guess, before this was sort of settled. There was this notion that what if exactly half of the parliament was made up of women? What if we had all of the parties nominate half of their seats or allocated half of their seats to women? And the debate was simply that, you know, it was shot down from the get-go, saying that it's not necessarily the more women you involve, or the more women you involve, the better things will turn out, and all sorts. At the moment, we have less than a third representation of females in the parliament. However, you can see that the moment a woman touches something, there's a complete turnaround. Case in point, our Minister of Finance has been reappointed, well, last time for a third term, simply because of her innovation in a turnaround strategy in rebuilding the economy and, providing funds for a larger chunk of funds for education, healthcare, this, that, and the other. Just the other day, we had presidential elections in November, and one of the candidates for president in the ruling party was a female, and she came very close to defeating the incumbent president. Here's the thing. Personally, my belief is that indeed the hand that rocks the cradle rules the world. There's this old proverb that says, educate a man and you educate one person. Educate a woman and you educate a village. Simply because of the nurturing perspective, simply because women take everyone that they love along when they grow. And I'm not saying this is not true for all men, but it has been proven over and over again.
Okay, I think we're going to have to stop. We could keep going on, but I really, really appreciate that. So I hope that everyone here has enjoyed the discussion, and please join me in giving the panelists a round of applause.